This conversation about the changing model of the utility company, and I'm pleased to welcome Doyle Beneby from CPS Energy and Ahmad Chatila from SunEdison. Doyle Beneby is the President and Chief Executive Officer of CPS Energy, the nation's largest municipal electric and gas utility. With over 30 years' experience in the energy industry, Doyle has expertise spanning strategic planning, generation and delivery, and asset acquisition. During his time at CPS Energy, Doyle has transformed the traditional utility generation fleet to one of the most diversified in the country. Ahmad has served as President and Chief Executive Officer since March of 2009. Prior to joining SunEdison, he served as Executive Vice President of the Memory and Imaging Division of Cypress Semiconductor. Mr. Chatila initially joined Cypress in 1991 and has held a number of management roles in technology development, manufacturing, and sales. Joining Doyle and Ahmad this morning will be our moderator, Amy Harder, who reports on energy policy for the Wall Street Journal's Washington Bureau. Please join me in welcoming all of them to the stage. Hey, good morning, Amy. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Well, good morning, everyone. We're happy to be here, and we have some good questions coming up. Cheryl told you a little bit about these companies. Just to tell you a little bit more, they're pretty much on the basic opposite ends of the utility world. Doyle oversees traditional utility, as Cheryl said. It's about 40% coal and 23% nuclear, which mirrors what the U.S. has overall. That's significantly diversified from just a few years ago, but it's still pretty heavy in the fossil fuel area. Ahmad, on the other hand, oversees a company with zero fossil fuel investments and is virtually all solar. And then, of course, with this recent purchase of First Wind, it's also increasingly wind-powered as well. So my first question is to Doyle, talking about the traditional utility model, which, of course, is very much evolving in the last couple of years, last decade or more, with the increase in renewables. Do you think the traditional utility is dying? And if it is, who or what is the culprit? Could it be companies like SunEdison?
Great question. I think, so let me distinguish for a second. We're traditional in one sense, but we're municipally owned. So we're a little bit different than investor owned. However, my prior background, most of it has been in the investor owned world. So that's a small little context there. But to your question, I think it is dying. I think that's a given. I think it's probably been accelerated to some degree by regulation and also technology. And so I believe that it's going to take a very different business model, a different way of looking at the business to survive. But no question, I believe that regulation, principally at the federal level, but somewhat at the state level, and also technology is driving. And the last dimension of that is customer awareness and choice. Customers are becoming more aware of energy usage. They're becoming more aware of options. And they're beginning to demand the same type of choice and responsiveness from an energy company as they do of FedEx or some of the other people that they expect instant response, choices, and being fast.
So Ahmad, are companies like yours, what role do they play in killing this traditional utility?
Well, first of all, we're not killing any utility. And my views are very close to what Doyle said. Where we came in from is the technology sector, trying to make solar costs lower and make it competitive with fossil fuels. And now our business model is evolving into owning assets and going after more than solar. And I think we're going to meet in the middle somewhere. So that's how we see it.
On that note, many people here might be familiar with the ongoing clash, for lack of a better word, between utilities and the solar industry over how to handle the surplus solar electricity that goes onto the grid. And that includes fight over net metering and fees that some solar users have to pay to hook up to the grid. So a question for both of you, and I know you guys have some partnerships between your companies. Can this competition become a symbiosis? And do you think it already is in some cases? Or do you think conflict in some cases might be inevitable?
Well, I think you're right. I think it's going to be both. I think competition, to some degree conflict, as you call it, is going to spur some unique alliances. It's going to test the survival instincts of the traditional utility model. It's going to make utilities more amenable to partnering with the SunEdisons of the world, or these technology companies that bring technological know-how, that bring the kind of research and development resources and thinking to the table. And it's to some degree a good marriage. Just as a point, we years ago at CPS Energy perhaps were one of the first to go big with a large solar request for proposal. We tied economic development to it, but it was somewhat unique. But when we looked at 119 companies or consortiums or partnerships that bid, it was an incredible array of strange bedfellows who you would think would normally maybe be mortal enemies. But they had
What's an example of that?
Say it again?
What's an example of some?
Well, I won't give any names, but but let's just say these are some people that were competing in different markets around the country. But they realized that here was an opportunity, and by coalescing together gave them a better chance at a foothold at what they viewed as a big opportunity. So no question that there are these kinds of conflicts, but our view has been, as a sort of, I speak for sort of a traditional utility, our view has been, let's partner with the SunEdisons or other technology companies instead of fighting or fighting progress. Let's partner with them, and we figure out a way to stay between our customers and the third parties, and we're going to be good with that. So yeah, there'll be conflict, but at the end, you're going to see a coalescence of sometimes on the surface what might appear to be competing interests to help move the industry forward and create these new business models.
Ahmad, what's your perspective on that? Have you found traditional utilities to be generally open to working with you, or do you find it more competitive in certain areas?
We find it both, actually. First of all, I'm surprised that almost all top executives in utilities see the change that is coming. I don't think anybody put their head in the sand and say no. The barriers that they're facing are like this. They've been making money for a long time by giving consistent returns to their shareholders. So their shareholders are telling them, don't take risk, don't change the business model. The other thing that happens in these organizations from my experience is people who get promoted within the ranks are people who don't take risk, because for 50 years or 60 or 70 years, this is not how, you don't get promoted by taking risk. So all of a sudden now they have staff that don't want to take that risk, and their investors are telling them no, their board is putting pressure on them, but the train is coming. And because of that, some people are like Doyle. You know, they step back and really they try to drive the change themselves. And he's been a visionary man on that, not because he's my friend, but he really has driven a lot of different ideas on the table. And others have gone into war, trying to defend the position. I think, you know, one of the Korean companies that we work with, they really have taught me this around 10 years ago, that there's two kinds of companies. Companies that think they're nomads, and some companies that try to develop castles. And they learned that from the moguls in India and elsewhere. So the minute the moguls start building castles, they lost. And I believe in being nomadic, and that's what he is, and just move and move and move and try experiment. So we try to avoid war. I think it's toxic. It's like a civil war. We don't want to be in it. We don't want to touch it. That's why in some states where there's a lot of antagonism, we're not there. We're not with the solar industry, we're not with the utilities. And with other utilities like CPS, like others, we've worked with many, we like to partner with them and always find a way to make money. There's always there, it's always there. It just requires that open-mindedness.
Doyle, your point about being municipal owned versus investor, I mean, that changes your outlook on certain things. I would guess you don't have to answer to these shareholders who are averse to risk. Do you think that makes you a little bit more open to some of these ideas and changes?
Well, it's probably less having to answer to shareholders per se, because, you know, my shareholders are the community, and sometimes they can be their own, they can have their own set of issues. But I think we are vertically integrated, so we own generation, transmission, and delivery, so there are more levels that we can monetize value in that chain. So that's one advantage we have. The other advantage we have, and this might be the biggest one, is that we are regulated locally. We're regulated by our city council. So we're not regulated by a public utility commission that's a part of the state government. So when we need to change policy, whether it's rates, whether it's a partnership, we typically don't have to go, we don't have to go to a utility commission, do a study, have public hearings. We can be very nimble and shift on a dime. But a part of our thinking, a part of my thinking is because of my investor-owned roots. And in my prior life, I was president of Exelon Power, which at the time was the clearinghouse, or the Exelon Power housed all the non-nuclear assets for Exelon, wind, solar, hydro, gas, coal. And so I came to CPS Energy with a different thought about having a bias towards decarbonizing our fleet. And when you start with that premise, it leads you to different branches and styles of thinking. And so it's been a sort of a gradual shift for us. But that's, I think you add that along with this nimbleness I talked about, being vertically integrated, having a company that has a AA+ credit rating, the highest in the industry, and we make an ideal counterparty. So it was almost a natural that as we try to be successful in this changing business model, we could easily find partners, and that starts the ideas flowing, and that kind of led to this path we're on. So we're somewhat unique, but I would argue that a lot of things that we find appealing about this forward-thinking business model could be applicable to a lot of other, even investor-owned utilities, and some that are not even vertically integrated.
So there's a lot going on in Washington right now with the utility industry. Top of mind for, I'm sure, these two folks and many of you in the room is the EPA's Clean Power Plan. This summer, it will issue final regulations addressing the carbon emissions of both new and existing sources power plants. Doyle, I understand that your company supports these regulations. I've seen comments saying as such. So please confirm or change that position if needed. And of course, Texas politicians are probably the loudest opponents of EPA across the board with all of the agency's regulations. So how can your company have such a different perspective than the politicians that also inhabit your state?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we've been full-throated supporters. We haven't opposed, and we've said—
That's a very key difference in Washington.
We said it can work, but with some caveats. And we think, for example, there should be greater dispensation for prior action. We think there should probably be more credit for nuclear, and we think that the capacity factor of 70% for natural gas is probably a bit high. It probably should be about 55 to 60%. And then the first building block that suggests you get 6% more efficiency from your coal plants. Most companies have already invested in the past for their plants to be more efficient. But our basic premise is that Texas, which has the most wind in the country, Texas is beginning to be a top solar player, I think top 5. It has an energy-only market. It has all the element to make this work if there was political agreement. So that's kind of our premise. And the second premise is that Texas, for the most part, has not had a successful track record of suing the feds. So I believe that at least let's think about a plan B in case litigation doesn't work. That there's a plan B that can work because of all the elements that Texas has. So we have tried to stay somewhat agnostic, but we believe that if it is implemented, that there's a way to make it work in Texas, and we want to be at the table for those discussions.
Ahmad, your company seems very well poised to benefit from this regulation, although some experts have said that EPA's rule heavily favors natural gas over renewables and other carbon-free sources like nuclear power as well. Do you think this rule does enough to shift the business model, and do you think your company is poised to benefit?
Yeah, so let me say, I want to talk about two things here. One is, Doyle and I were chatting many times actually about this. EPA was initiated by President Nixon and the Clean Air Act was initiated by President Bush. Look, this is a trend. It's unstoppable. Don't worry. Many here are business people and technologists. Don't worry about the politics in Washington the next 4 years, 3 years. The trend is unavoidable. My kids don't know what a telephone is. It doesn't. So for them, it's all iPads, cell phone. They don't know. Like, what is a telephone? They don't know what it is. So the change is coming, whether people in politics like it or not. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of our own benefit versus natural gas, the only way we tackle this is by making solar really, really cheap and renewable energy very cheap. Because by making things a lot lower cost, we can then fight any battle. So if we look at solar, when I joined the industry in 2009, the cost of a panel was $2.50 a watt. Today, it's around 50 cents, 55 cents. We think that by 2020, it will be 32 cents. And by 2030, with our own view on polysilicon and glass and aluminum frame, all that, it will be 20 pennies. That means in Arizona, we can make solar for 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Natural gas can't touch that. So that's how we're driving technology. The other thing also versus natural gas, the way we position ourselves, we're distributed. You don't need transmission lines, you don't need distribution. And we see that impact in Chile today. You see, a lot of people look at it and say, wow, but in the US, you're getting 30% tax credit, right? But in Chile today, we sign contracts with no government intervention to mining companies, which are very conservative, and they cannot have a downtime. And we have just convinced the Indian government that solar and imported coal is the same cost in 2015. That's why they announced their 100 gigawatt plan. And my view is probably in a week or so, they're gonna show a 200 and more gigawatt commitment from the industry to deploy solar in India. So that's what we focus on, unstoppable things. We swim downstream in a river. We don't try to fight a reactionary battle. It just doesn't make sense.
And some believe, actually, I can't confirm this, but there's lots of discussion out there that the EPA is actually looking beyond coal and at some point will contemplate the same type of restrictions on natural gas.
They've said that publicly.
Yeah, so you could argue that the Clean Air Rule, Clean Power Plan, really is looking even beyond coal and to natural gas, and that it's really driving heavily towards conservation, demand response, and a baseload technology like storage to emerge.
You mentioned the investment tax credit, Ahmad. Let's talk for a moment about the tax incentive, specifically for wind and solar. The production tax credit for wind expired in 2013 and has yet to be renewed. And then the investment tax credit for solar expires at the end of 2016 unless Congress renews it. Ahmad, how do you think this continued expiration of the production tax credit is affecting the wind industry and your decision late last year to buy First Wind? And then what about, how important is the investment tax credit for your solar business here in the US?
Actually, it's very important. Without the investment tax credit for solar right now, the US doesn't work. And the reason is because other sources are heavily subsidized. I read your own article. There's like $50 billion of subsidies on oil and other kind of sources. I would like a level playing field. If the government gives me that, then we can win.
But the oil and gas is the transportation and solar is electricity.
Well, also on investment. So on exploration, they give them a significant tax credit. I wish the government gives me a tax credit on my OPEX, my SG&A and R&D. That would be great. So I would like a level playing field. And since there's none, I would like that to continue. Now, it's going to drop from 30 to 10% on solar. It's going to be fine for us. I think we'll be okay because the cost of solar is declining very rapidly. Also, our company is global. So US is not the center of the universe for everything. So we're in India and China and elsewhere. So
you mean Washington is not the center of the universe?
Unfortunately not. No, it's not.
What about the production tax credit? Can you kind of talk about why you decided to purchase
Well, we decided to do First Wind because our customers in Chile, actually, it's a beautiful experiment. They're telling us, give me more. I don't like the intermittency of solar during the day. Can you give me more? And right now, what we're designing with these customers is wind, solar combination with hydro, where we give them firmer power. Not firm, but firmer power, and they can handle the rest. The other thing also, wind is equal to solar in size today in the market. And since we have something called the YieldCo, which we drop our assets there to own them, and then it drops cash flow back. We took a company public with $107 million cash flow, and that company today is worth $4.1 billion because it's a high growth, low risk company. And because of that, it's very valuable. Well, there is around $45 billion worth of cash flows in wind assets around the world today. So it's a turkey shoot. I want to be in it. I want to learn it. I want to know how to use it and how to maintain it and how to own it.
What about in your business, Doyle, the production tax credit and investment tax credit? I saw in your generation mix, you have significant goals to increase both of those, but they're still very small parts of your generation mix. How important are these two federal policies in you getting more into that business?
Well, I mean, I think in general, as Ahmad suggested, it's very, very important right now. The question becomes, can renewable industries be self-sustaining going forward? I think there's going to be a sort of reference before storage technologies. I think when you're able to combine solar's easier. When you combine solar with storage technologies, it's a total breakthrough. In my view, you have almost dispatchable renewables, and that's a game changer. So it's probably going to be very difficult in my mind until you get to that point that the tax credits are not impactful in making the economics better in the U.S. right now. The other thing to think about is it's hard to get a collection of enough solar and even wind to some degree to affect things like three-phase power. It's not as easy. It can be done, but it's very, very difficult. So you have to, at some point, to scale it up, combine it with something else. And so when that is able to happen, you're going to see, at least in my mind, that is a tremendous breakthrough. That's, you know, when these things are combined and they're dispatchable, it changes everything.
Speaking of that, going back to you, Ahmad, you know, your company started out as a silicone producer for solar panel manufacturers, and then you've expanded into operating solar and wind farms. What other technology might you invest in that you haven't told anyone yet, and you want to tell all of us today?
Well, look, I'm an engineer, right? I'm not a good one, but I worked in R&D for a long time, and I worked on technology development. But in this energy business is an infrastructure investment. In an infrastructure investment, you cannot think about it like something that can be used in a cell phone. Very different mindset. It has to live for 30 years. So for me, the things that I'm open to is things that are, unfortunately, I need things that have been piloted for a while. So that's the thing that I would invest in. Now, my view on technology as an engineer, and I forget about SunEdison, is probably the most important technologies that we can work on right now is storage. It is the most important thing because it will transform the world how we know it. And in that regard, I see trajectories where the cost today is around maybe $600 per kilowatt hour for the material, the balance of plant, the warranty, the shipping. And that number is going to be less than 200 by 2020. I've seen those roadmaps. We're counting on them. We have our suppliers. So this is not a speculation. It's not a report I'm reading. I think if people here have to work on storage, they have to beat that. And they have to do something transformative. With those numbers, we don't need oil anymore. I mean, at $200, really you do not need oil. And
would you have electric cars then?
Sorry?
You would shift all the cars to electric cars?
Well, that's what's going to happen because if you're able to drive 300-400 miles at $15,000 battery, aside from the rest of the car, then why do you need oil? It just doesn't make sense. Why do you have to drive to a gas station if you can power at work or in your house? Remember, my kids don't know what a telephone is. So you just have to see it that way. Now, you might say, but how come the volume is not increasing? Because there's not enough models. People don't buy electric vehicle. They buy a Mercedes. They buy a BMW. And right now, only 1% of people care about the environment deeply. I mean, people say, oh, 72% will vote for someone who cares about the environment. I don't believe it, really. I think they care about their families. They care about their education. They care about their health. They care about a lot of things before they care about the environment. So once we start giving them these cars with models, and they're starting to come out of the design shops, I think the world will be changed the way we know it. And there's implications on security and all that. It's not all positive.
Have you thought about investing in some sort of battery technology or storage technology?
We have done a couple. We like a couple of companies. One is called Emergy. It's a flow battery technology. And the other one is called UEP, because they use something that is completely safe and has been used a lot before. It's between a lab pilot line stage. And we like lithium ion, because lithium ion is like, for us, like silicon. Is the one that everybody's using. Companies have $10 billion revenue in these technologies. You cannot fight that very easily. So we try to look at innovative technologies, but also we look at the mainstream as well.
Doyle, what about you? Your company has done a lot to really try to get people to be more efficient with their electricity, to help your company be more efficient. I know there's been some pushback in some parts of Texas about that, in San Antonio area, but what are some of the more radical ideas that you've thought about but haven't yet said out loud?
Well, so there's two distinct dimensions here. So the one dimension is generation wholesale, right? So there's a push to decarbonize our fleet, and that's employing a lot of different technologies, wind, solar. We're working with some companies to prototype battery storage in solar farms and study and see how well it syncs and see how well it can be responsive in the system. So there's some creative things we're working with people on the wholesale side. Then there's kind of retail distribution side that I think offers a world of opportunity for us, and that's going to be the ones where we really, we really partner with a lot of technology companies. So my view of this thing is that the energy is going to become, to some degree, an analog to the internet, that there are going to be distribution points that are going to be all sorts of, they're going to vary all sorts of ways. You know, we could have an industrial customer that has a data center that might decide it's better for them to put a combustion turbine on their property to power themselves, but also sell back to us. We could have an array of rooftop solars for residential customers. We could have demand response through home area networks. We could have utility scale solar. There are going to be all these points producing power, and there's got to be an open architecture, a common architecture, so the electrons travel where we need. So I should be indifferent to whether or not I buy power from that industrial customer that has their own generation. They save me to sustain capital to invest in power plants. And if I can access those megawatts when I want, I should be indifferent. And that's the way it's going to be. It's going to be almost like, a maze of nodal points that might mimic the internet or cloud system, right? And so we're going to have to think of this world where it's not a central station where power comes from. It's going to come from a whole lot of places, and it could take the form of instant demand response. Same thing. The second thing is these power sources, if they can in aggregate be aggregated, we can help voltage regulation on a system. We can modulate your voltage 2 or 3 volts and you wouldn't notice. We can help the system keep frequency up on high demand days. There are ways to monetize this cluster of customers that are connected to you. So in order to do that, we have to work with technology companies. So for us, we're not R&D, but we do partner with people that do that. And that's going to be, to me, the secret sauce. Someone is going to crack that code to put out a model where everything's distributed, it flows, and you're able to monetize portions of it, but you're also able to give your customers choice. I think that's the future, and I think that's 10, 15 years out.
Do you think that's going to be a company like Google or a company like CPS Energy?
It's going to be a company like Google partnering with a company like CPS Energy or SunEdison, quite frankly. I'm telling you, it's going to create some unholy alliances. You know, it's going to be some very strange bedfellows to make this work. The other metaphor I use or analogy I use is, you know, if you have a laptop or a iPad, you know, and you hit for what's it, Hulu or Netflix, no matter where you are, you draw the content. You don't carry a disk around. And I think to some degree, at some point, electrons are going to be almost like that. We're going to be, we as a company will be importing electrons from all sorts of different places and exporting at the same time. We could be buying and selling from an industrial customer at the same time. And anyway, so the point is, the future is going to be these decentralized nodes that might, in my view, mimic the internet. And the last point I'd make is, it also, this concept adds to a degree protection against hardening against whether it's cyber attacks or physical attacks, because things will be decentralized. And I would argue at some point, there's going to be an argument or discourse that the taxpayer should fund some of this, not just the ratepayer, because it brings a dimension of security to critical infrastructure.
A lot of these really innovative ideas, though, I would argue really depend upon some sort of increased engagement from the customers. And I think generally speaking, we all go home at night, we turn on our lights and we expect them to be on. And if they're not, then, everything goes crazy, and there's this brief moment of action, like when the blackout in the Super Bowl last year. I remember Republicans in Congress, Senator Lisa Murkowski specifically said she hoped that would spur action, and of course it did not. But the important thing to say is that average people don't care much about electricity until they don't have it. They don't go to a gasoline station every day and fuel up their car. So how important is just the average Joe on the street who wants power to his home? How important is his engagement in this, and what's holding him back?
Well, so first, I think consultants have done studies. I'm paraphrasing, so I might be close, but I think Accenture or someone did a study and said the average person in a year thinks about 3 minutes total cumulative about energy and their bill. So part of and I'm one of them, by the way, even though I'm in the industry. So part of the challenge is going to be the last frontier is customer attitude and getting sort of changing customer perspective, getting them interested. The other thing is they pay on average less than 3% of wallet share on electricity. They pay more for oftentimes for cell phone and cable bills than they do for electricity in some parts, and they think nothing of it.
But the iPhone is so much more exciting than electricity.
So the point is, there's an element to providing service for them and options, and again, that's where, for us, third parties come in, because you're right, they take it for granted that the electrons will arrive when they need it flawlessly, and that's a given, that's a cover charge. The question becomes, what else do you provide for them? And so we're trying to figure that out, but that's going to be a big element to this, this whole notion of choice, mobility, something new and shiny also.
Ahmad, what about you? I mean, do you find that customers who seek out solar and wind, do you find them more engaging with their electricity than they would be otherwise?
Somewhat, but I think what Doyle said is correct. We're working on branding right now, right? So I'm trying to learn about it. And one of the things is you ask people, do you like solar? Oh yeah, totally, great. Okay, so how much did you save last year by having solar? And they go, I don't know. So really they don't think about it. What we have found out is you have to change the conversation completely. You have to make it very personal. And one of the things like we did in schools, one of our genius salespeople have done it, is instead of trying to sell schools electricity, he told them, during the summer, you don't need the electricity, so you can net meter it all, and because of that, you can hire more teachers. Now, the schools are very interested. So you have to really change the conversation with people in homes to a different level. You save money here, you can afford more for your kids, and you have to show them a tally so that make it more personal. We don't know how to change the conversation yet, but that's what we need to do. Otherwise, who cares? It's going to be 3 minutes. Actually, I don't know what my electricity bill is.
I don't either, so We agree on something.
If you're in our service territory, it's cheap.
What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the utility industry, in one sentence?
I think, and this is kind of a global and amorphous, and I think the biggest challenge is resisting change.
That was a good one sentence. What about you, Ahmad?
I think it's the same. That's exactly right. You can either ride the horse, like I said, right? Let me tell you this. So I work in the chip industry, right? At some point, people said you cannot go below 1,000 nanometers, which is a micron, sub-micron. Oh, no one can do it. Today, we're at 14 nanometers, like 100 times lower than 1,000 nanometers. So you just have to know that if the trend is there, you just have to ride it.
You mentioned briefly cybersecurity. How concerned are you guys about that potential?
Very much.
People say smarter grid equals greater chances of some sort of attack.
Well, we're very much concerned about it. We try to bolster our solar installations, although they're distributed, because we feel that having holes is a danger. And we've seen in other industries how devastating it could be. So it is on something high on our mind.
Yeah, there's a sort of a physical dimension, right? You heard about the Metcalf incident, so it's kind of that's out there. The cyber, of course, really scares all of us. We're somewhat confident in a weird way that it's very challenging to pull off, but once it happens, it's kind of a black swan event, and we're struggling with what to do about it. But there is some vulnerability there that's very, very concerning. And then the third thing is, of course, there's this potential for solar storms and other things that could emit radiation and take out the grid that way too. But the cyber end of it is very distressing, and I don't think anybody's got that solved yet. However, I would say that you increase the odds of avoidance and survivability if your resources are decentralized.
In our final couple of minutes, I want to ask one question, quite fitting since we're here in Washington, or close enough. If you were president for a day and could make any sort of decision without having to worry about politics in this space, what would you do? Ahmad?
I would depoliticize the whole discussion. Solar, nuclear, gas is not a political issue. It should be a technology issue, what's right for the country. And I think going in and to the other aisle and really ensure that other people, there are going to be winners and losers, but try to help people move on with education.
Who would be a loser?
I think the coal industry for sure is going to be devastated. I think certain utilities who we told to do certain things, like in the South, don't do gas, do coal. I think it's unfair to go and put a gun to their head and force them to make changes when we told them in the 70s and 80s, go that route. I think that's what I would do. I would move one step and be more encompassing in my thinking.
I would depoliticize the energy discussion. I would decouple the discussion of low carbon from any political implications. And this argument sort of started with the U.S. being the exploiting the world's resources, and it immediately became politicized. I would work to decouple that and say, let's just do the right thing, not because the UN thinks so or whatever, and make it this discourse totally apolitical.
Wow, we're going to have a Washington without politics. I don't think Washington would exist without that. Well, I just want to thank you guys very much for chatting up here with me today. It was great.
Thank you.